Hi, folks. This is Tom Salemi. It is Friday, May 12th. It's the day after DeviceTalks Boston. Thank you to everyone who came out to DeviceTalks Boston over the past 2 days. We had record-breaking attendance. We had rooms filled to the brim. We had really thoughtful conversations, and above all, we got to meet some of the best people. Thank you doubly to everyone who walked up and said hello and introduced themselves and told us their stories and shared what the podcast has meant to them. And I gave me the opportunity to share what it's meant to me. So it's just been a powerful 2 days. And I'm grateful to everyone who helped me put on the show, including my podcast partner, Chris and Newmarker, all the folks at WTWH Media, the owner of DeviceTalks, who handled the logistics of the conference, and there's a lot of logistics to the conference. And thanks finally, of course, to you, our great DeviceTalks community. So I'm both exhausted and wired, if that's possible. And I'm looking forward to playing DeviceTalks West, which happens in October. But I'm not here to sell anything. I just want to introduce this episode where we had Joe Mullings, the CEO of the Mullings Group, which of course is a large executive search firm. And we had Peter Stebbins, who is now involved in the startup community, but he previously had spent over 3 decades at Johnson & Johnson, most recently vice president of business development. Peter's become a great friend of DeviceTalks and of myself. I've enjoyed meeting and getting to know Peter. So happy to have these two gentlemen on stage with us in the final panel at DeviceTalks Boston. We were able to take some questions from the audience. We actually did have an audience, and thank you to everyone who stayed late to watch us do this wacky stuff. And that's it. It was a far-ranging conversation. We talked a bit about the conference, a lot about the conference, but we also talked a lot about larger forces at play in medtech. And I just gave it a re-listen, and I enjoyed it. I missed a lot because I was thinking of next questions, and it was nice to re-listen. So I hope you'll enjoy it as well. I didn't do like, follow, subscribe at the end, so we'll do it now. Please do, if you enjoy this podcast, to subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network. You'll get future DeviceTalks Weeklies, future Intuitive Talks, future Striker Talks, future Boston Scientific Talks, and Abbott Talks is coming out. So make sure you, again, once again, like, follow, and or subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network. And that's it. I'm going to play this, again, this great discussion we had on stage at the very end of DeviceTalks Boston, which happened this week at the BCEC. And thank you again to everyone who came out. Honestly, it was a highlight of my professional career. And I'm so grateful that to everyone who took the time to come out and be part of it. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everybody, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome to the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast Live, our first live episode. I'm actually not looking at Chris Newmarker through a Zoom video. We're actually looking at you right directly.
Face to face.
Face to face. Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Good to be here, Tom.
Actually,
good to be here.
Here, yeah, usually
here,
there.
Actually
You're
here.
actually here.
Not
so
on the Zoom, yes.
We're here at the end of DeviceTalks. What was it called again? Boston?
Boston. We were in Boston.
Yeah, DeviceTalks Boston. There it is. It's right behind you. And I didn't get my cookie. I needed my afternoon cookie, and I've been running around and forgot to get it. So.
Could someone get Tom a cookie?
No, this is good. It'll get embarrassing. So we're going to break down the past 2 days. We've had over 1,000 people attending. Great energy, great comments from folks. I really couldn't be happier with the way things have turned out, just to be honest. And I'm grateful to everyone who actually did stop me as requested and said hello and just thank you to everyone for the comments of the podcast and just for the good wishes and for being here. Most important, it's been great to see a full room in almost every session.
Yeah. Love the energy, record attendance.
Yeah.
I mean, just a lot of momentum. I mean, it's just great to have this wonderful community that we're building here. What a wonderful industry. This has been awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome event.
I think we probably.
Woo!
There's probably like 2,000 or 3,000 people out here in the audience right now, you think?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, please, fire codes, folks.
We
Please
are
make
talking
sure
near the end of the event. People are.
No, it's a hardcore crowd, so thank you for being here. So we're joined by Joe Mullings, CEO of the Mullings Group. Joe, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Joe.
And Joe is a keen observer of all that is medtech, so we thought we need someone who's got eyes everywhere and can give us highlights on all the stuff we missed, because we're in one room and there's 3 other rooms that are going on. So there's stuff that might have happened that maybe I don't want to hear about that you folks can bring me up to speed on, and folks in the audience as well. And happy to have Peter Stebbins as well. Peter has been on the podcast also before. Peter, thank you for joining us. Peter asked a question during the Mike Mahoney keynote yesterday, and it was a good question, and it was a good conversation. So I'm glad folks were able to who were at the meeting were able to be part of it. If you weren't at the meeting, you're hearing this podcast. Well, reconsider your decision next time and come to DeviceTalks. So, Joe, we'll go to you first. Well, I mean, we usually go with Chris Newmarker's Newsmakers. Chris, do you want to pass the mantle on to our guest newsmaker? Or,
Sure, I'll hand the newsmaker baton to Joe. Joe, what?
Joe, I mean, just give us what we can kind of do a round robin. And again, honestly, we've got a mic available to folks. I'd love to hear what others have seen and heard about at the meeting. But
I have a question just at the top of my head, actually.
Okay.
Which is
Joe.
just. I'd be interested to hear what Joe thought, because Peter as well. We came into this event here, and we're undoubtedly facing some challenges as an industry right now. A lot of the talks were about opportunities. I mean, do you think? Do you come out of this is there a reason to feel opportunity around here?
You're harshing my buzz, Chris. I was feeling great until you had to mention the challenges. So.
Well, there are challenges, but
Thanks
there's so much opportunity.
Sorry, Joe. Bring the tone back up.
Come on, Joe.
Well, first of all, again, congratulations on a great meeting. I think these meetings are important because they force dialogue. We're not walking around looking at products. We're not looking at technologies, but we're forcing dialogue. And at this point in time in medtech, I think dialogue is really critical. Because there are so many changes going on right now. And if we look at coming out of 20, 21, 22, coming into 23, I think we got ahead of ourselves with technology, candidly. Mm-hmm. Whether you look at the VC world, and Peter, I want your thoughts on this. All the VCs I dealt with, they were bragging to me that they hadn't invested in a medical device, an analog medical device, in the last couple of years. They've gone totally digital. And I think that going totally digital, looking for a full quantum leap in a culture that creeps along and still uses fax machines and Xerox copiers is sort of a dichotomy. So what I saw is I'm seeing a return to analog from investors into the device world. So that's number one, and it's all super positive. And I'm also seeing us now getting our head wrapped around optimization of existing technologies and taking baby steps using data in an appropriate, palatable way to include in the current workflow, rather than these massive jumps in technology that we think, or investors thought, were going to happen in medtech. They aren't going to happen as quick as they were. So what it does is it returns back to a focus on making devices. We know how to solve a lot of these diseases that people are dying of, especially chronic disease. But we haven't really gone towards the optimization of the newest technologies in managing those. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, Chris, there's still a lot of great opportunity, but I think what we're doing now is kind of righting the ship a little bit. I think the last little bit, it was almost too easy. We can kind of get back to some basics. And in my sense is that the LPs were saying, hey, the two biggest things in the world are healthcare costs are going to eat the world, and software is going to eat the world. So those two things, that's what I want to invest in. And I think people convince themselves that, hey, there's these things that can be added to this fairly analog space, and let's do it. And some early things work both within medical devices and things around surgery, but also as you get into, say, Olive and some of these other areas in revenue cycle management, others are like, oh, it's very high priced, very good. It's a great match. Your LP loves the fact that you're investing in digital and healthcare. It's the perfect marriage. So make sure we, put the money there. And life kind of played out over a while, and a lot of that is still really good. But if it's worth $10, but being valued at $25, it's like, okay, it's better than $1. But now we're kind of right sizing to that's really what's going to work. That's what's people going to pay for. What the hospital is going to pay for. It's not just nice to have.
Right.
If it's really moving things along, either the doctors have to have it because they love it and they move faster, or that works. Other cases, just hey, it's just a cost of doing business, and we just added something more expensive to our tools.
I thought
any share. Anyway, I think this is a good discussion of like how we get back to normal investing's got to execute. You got to deliver on value that the hospital is going to pay for, and set your expectations in line with that. Both investors and companies need to set themselves up.
Let me jump on one thing with Peter here for a sec. So Peter used the word hospital a couple times, and I think what he means is where the providers are, because we have to make sure that we really delineate what's happening right now, and it's the 3D chessboard on Star Trek going on right now in healthcare, because you've got misaligned incentives across the board in every single area of the business. It's the largest business in the world. Second is education. And so it's that large, you're going to have a lot of players coming in. But now these changing centers of care, private equity becoming very active right now in medtech, which has not happened before, outside of roll-ups and contract manufacturing for the most part.
Yep.
So you've got changing centers of care. You have the clinician no longer making the decision, where in the past, if you could convince the clinician, you pretty much could move the product through the hospital setting. So once you start to take let's back off the frothy telehealth digital side, because we still can't figure out who's going to pay for it. And now we have the changing center of cares. And very few of the strategics are paying attention to the ASC growth. They're paying lip service to it, but there's really only one, in my opinion, Stryker, really paying attention to it.
Interesting.
And so you've got this dynamic going on as well. That's going to keep people confused for a while. And the strategics playbook and the venture community is still playing from a legacy model, in my opinion.
We had our two keynotes. We had Tom Poland from BD, and we had Mike Mahoney from Boston Scientific yesterday, and both, I thought, were very much along that theme. BD, you're talking about diagnostics and vaccines. You can't get any more basic than that. But Mike Mahoney, I thought one of the better moments was when I asked him about whether Boston Scientific had any interest in a surgical robotic system, or at least investing heavily in it. And his point was, like, we're very good at making medical devices. Intuitive is very good at making robots. I don't see a need to try to do what they do, and I think we can just sort of stick to our knitting. So it does seem to be sort of a drawing in of if I'm following you correctly, getting back to basics and sort of
some of the companies
getting back to what we do well.
Some of the companies doing well are the ones that kind of stuck to their knitting.
Yeah.
And
I think part of it comes to the notion of using robots everywhere versus, it was very timely. Mike was saying that just about the time that Corindus was having their, Siemens Healthineers was having their, earnings call, saying that, we spent $1 billion for this business and it's going to work for endovascular and the team's going to get there for neurovascular, but cardiovascular was
they're out of it.
A third of their valuation.
Yep.
So they wrote down $350 million because that's out. And Mike was saying, I'm not going to get into interventional robotics. He's like, there's not a good place for interventional robotics.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of good places for tools and sharpers. They're still like looking at these kind of gray things on this screen. So there's room to be made there, but doesn't mean it needs to be, robotic. So.
Yeah, and the other dynamic too, and let's stay at hospitals for a second. I'll go back up to the hospital setting. You've got 50% of the hospitals in the U.S. are going to be operating at a deficit this year. So if you're selling CapEx, and there's not a clear present value in there of how it's going to make money or shorten time or answer the labor charge out of the gate, you're going to have a challenge over the next 24 months is what I'm forecasting for this. So you've got that right now. Chronic disease right now being managed 20% of our GDP. We know how people are dying. We know how people are getting sick. We also have insight into subclinical before the disease actually gets there. So, that's an area that still does not get enough attention. That is the low-hanging fruit for the use of, AI will kill us, but until then, it can help heal us, right? That's the low-hanging fruit, I think, that is still not being respectfully addressed in the marketplace by the large strategics. And I, in fact, think they're going to play that away to the pharmaceuticals, and I think they're going to make a mistake. I think you're going to see the pharmaceutical companies get into that front-end RPM, remote patient monitoring, managing the disease state at home, even potentially catching it subclinically. And they're going to take that enormous pie that's growing over the next 10, 15 years away from the device world. Because they understand, they have more PhDs than med device does. They understand disease states better than med device does. They've got deeper pockets than med device does. And remote patient monitoring is not a tough nut to crack. And it feeds into their pharma model really well. So I think that that's going to get fumbled away by the device manufacturers in the near term.
Interesting. I mean, we did have a discussion about, and Chris, you can share, but I had a lot of discussion on digital health and sort of where we are with that, even that terminology, whether it even applies anymore, but also what the future of it is and how it can bring value. And after all this money invested, all this time committed, there's still a very open question as to what value it's going to bring. I know we had Lana Karen from Phillips Ventures on the panel, and I'm not sure if she's in the room or not. I'd love to get her take on what was talked about. But the connected health, the pharma moving to connected health, are we talking about technology that is going to connect the hospital to the home? I mean, is that the territory that the device companies are seeding?
Well, it's interesting. Peter mentioned the VCs, and he's a lot closer to the VC world than I am. He plays in it now. Is the problem with the VCs is they look at the two largest valued companies in the world, and they both own operating systems, right? You've got Apple and Microsoft, respectfully 2.3 and 2.7 trillion. So the VCs can't help themselves. Right, they have to go, that's what it is, get an operating system in the hospital. And you listened to Avail yesterday, I like what they're doing on the other side of the firewall, getting as an API plugin into the OR and becoming that OS for the system. But what pharma can do is pharma can make the investment, and they also have the engagement with the patient population there. Because the chronic disease is already being treated by pharma. And chronic disease is 80% of that 20% of the GDP and managing that. And so managing that before it becomes catastrophic, or IDing it before it even subclinically, before it becomes crippling, I think is the unlock for where all the opportunity is in sort of healthcare. And you have that convergence of device, pharma, and biotech all converging. And in the middle of that is the data play, if you will, the connectivity. But I think the connectivity right now is just the RPM side of things over the next few years. Solve that if you really want to cash a big check.
So you don't think the Massimos or the or the iRhythms or whatever are gonna no.
No, I don't think so.
Oh.
Their tech potentially could be rolled out. I mean, I really had thought through. Joe was saying it, but when we talk about the pharma company, so if somebody has a drug for ulcerative colitis or whatever, they're going to be managed with patients for a long time. And if you end up with some way to measure that, and then they can do it themselves. And the issue with a lot of both real biotech and medtech, if you need venture capitalists, their money is coming from limited partners, right? The pensions out there are saying, hey, I want to invest in these different, that's where the money's coming from. I think the VCs are actually smartening up in terms of enough digital or whatever, but still right now, as they go back to raise their next round, when they go to the pensions, what are they going to say they're going to invest in? And last cycle, it was, we'll do digital in medtech or biotech. Now it's a harder discussion for them to raise their money. That's one of the reasons they're being, dinosaur arms on. They have a lot of dry powder, but they don't want to spend it because they're afraid of not being able to raise it the next year, which rolls down to Series A and B companies worried about, I can't raise my Series B and C next year. So anyway, but I do think the pharma has a potential play in terms of that disintermediation. We're kind of connecting right to the patient because they own the patient, and as Big Pharma, they have the money to potentially support their cash flow of these drugs.
And I also think you're going to see, right now, we only know what we know and what exists in a really legacy environment. I'm forecasting a brand new entity coming out, and I think it'll spin out of pharma. And if you look at the players right now, you got United Healthcare as the 5th largest company in the world. I think they're $340 billion. Okay, and everybody gets excited over Medtronic being 32 billion. So let's just take that. And then you have the tech-enabled companies like the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks, and the Apples, where everybody thought they were going to, myself included, thought they were going to sort of get into healthcare. They just can't do it. They don't understand the biology, and they don't respect the FDA, candidly. They're just, sometimes you can be too smart for yourself. Having sat inside the walls of two of those companies closely, the arrogance there intellectually, I'm not getting fans from them on this podcast, but intellectually, the arrogance there, not respecting the FDA or the design cycle. And then,
frankly, the healthcare systems, it's complicated.
It's complicated.
I mean, it's actually generous to call it a system.
Yeah, it's generous to call it a system. And I do think you're going to get a consumer-obsessed entity that will come out of the pharma world. So let's think of it like, somebody told me this analogy. Think of American Express. So they deal direct with the customer, but the customer never pays them. They get actually paid by the entity,
by the vendors,
by the vendors, right? And then the service runs through the bank. But Amex and Visa are obsessed with customer engagement, and MedTech doesn't deal with the customer, i.e., the patient, the consumer. They deal with the payers and the providers and the clinicians. But pharma still has a direct line to consumer, and you can look at that in behavior, because when was the last time, other than Watchmen, you saw a commercial on television, terrestrial television? Boston Sci, right? And I think you had during the Super Bowl, you had
maybe Hologic had a...
Right, and that was it, though.
Yeah.
But talking directly to the consumer.
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see coming out of pharma, because they're used to that, there's going to be a brand new entity that will become consumer obsessed, and the consumer won't pay them, but indirectly pharma will benefit from that, and they are going to take over that chronic care business.
And that entity would need to be an independent one,
yes,
because any drug company only has 9 years of selling that product. So my ulcerative colitis example before, you can't build a whole business for 3 years and you only have 6 years left to sell it. So, but as a space, that it potentially is a...
And United Healthcare won't do it because their customer engagement, if you ever dealt with them, is abysmal. Mm-hmm. That's a culture there. So this is where Device has to keep their eyes open. We have a great place here, and we don't need to be at the front of the pack. But I think what we've got to do is make sure that these steps of magnitude that we are trying to push onto the industry right now could potentially ruin it for what's coming 3 to 5 years from now.
But the good news is there are some low-hanging fruit for things to continue to improve upon using technology, either digital technology or just advanced engineering and materials and things. Which
one theme I heard a number of times
haven't been getting funded recently because they've been looking for the home run.
Yeah, I was just saying one theme I heard a number of times, during this show was, it was companies really looking to try to own data. Especially like Stryker and Zimmer Biomet. I both heard from both of them this idea of okay, we're going to try to, have this whole array of things around, the ortho operating environment. We're going to collect this data, and we're going to use this data to, make the argument to health providers about why, this technology will give them more efficiencies, will help them operate better, will, help their patients as well. So. That definitely seems to be one thing they're driving at,
So the data thing is I chuckle at it because first define data to me, and then the only way you can extend out a real movement is if you have agreed upon language. Language defines communication, and you can't even define the language of data right now in medtech or healthcare at the patient bedside or pre or post or intraoperative. So while I love that concept, you can still put 15 R&D people out of the digital plays in a room and ask them to take the same test. And if I show them a cat, they'll tell me a cat. But if I ask them for a definition of data, they would not be able to give you a definition of data.
So even that's really challenging.
That's going to be a challenge, and I think it's a much longer road. I think we're irresponsibly throwing around the word data.
Yeah, because even if you go into the clinical side around patient-reported outcomes, pain is one of the most important things right out there. But everyone's different. So the notion of what does that data really mean? You get in the gait of a patient from a canary device. It's going to take a long time for that to get to the point, and it will happen we will, like, through brute force, get to the point where the most important things, that data becomes knowledge and insights and action and saves lives and helps lives. But it's, you know, it's not like, you know, a very black and white type of thing that you can measure, like cholesterol level or something. It's much more complicated and disputable.
I think it's going to be a long time if ever that we have an ECG of smart EM.
It was interesting that throughout, and at this point, if there are folks who want to kind of engage and ask questions or make comments, Sean will bring a microphone, but it was amazing to me how quickly AI entered almost every single conversation, or people had an answer for AI. I mean, it's clearly, I mean, it's only, obviously it's been something that's been developing for years. It's kind of reached the public consciousness.
ChatGPT came out, we're all interacting with it.
5 or 6 months ago, and now it seems like it's become an integral part of a lot that's going on. I know there's been products that have been using, I know this isn't entirely new to medtech, but it really has come to the forefront, and I'll take some responsibility. I'm asking the question, so if I bring it up, people have to answer it. But it's part of the lexicon now of medtech, at least for now, and you wonder if it's another layer of technology if it's going to help or if it's going to complicate things.
I think it's going to help if you go after the optimization. I think the organizations, this again, I'm obviously a fan of Stryker. They're constantly looking at optimization of existing procedure, optimization of existing device. They bought Vocera last year, January of 23, for $3 billion. So they're looking for optimization. I think the large strategics, or even the small startups that look at Moon Surgical, and I'll use them as another example on the device side. So everybody wanted to build a big soft tissue robot, whether it's CMR, Intuitive, Medtronic, J&J. But I thought what Moon did was really clever, because what they're doing is optimizing existing technologies, using a technology. So I forecast them being picked up by J&J or Medtronic because of the faulty soft tissue robots going up, because they don't cannibalize the straight stick business that both of them have already. Mm-hmm. And it's a much lower cost on entry. They're smart enough on their pricing models. They may come in a full lease model and just say, you don't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of service,
they're addressing actual inefficiency in healthcare.
They're addressing inefficiency, right? So on the AI side, I think if you look at AI as it goes to optimization of current workflow, that's where your low-hanging fruit is. And I think the device companies that are going to be billion-dollar exits are going to be more focused on what's existing today, how do I optimize it, how do I address the labor issue, how do I make the clinician's job a little easier, drop their cognitive load, and how do I work with what's existing already in the ecosystem? Because that's where Medtronic and J&J and Stryker and Edwards will spend billions of dollars in acquisitions that protects the moat they already have, but supercharges it. That's where I
thought it was interesting at our DeviceTalks West event in October, which will be coming back next October.
October 18th and 19th.
There we go, Santa Clara. But Medtronic gave us a nice little journey on their GI Genius, system, and that it seemed very elegant. The idea that that someone doing a colonoscopy could have these little green boxes that just say, hey, this might be something you should look at. Mm-hmm. That seems like a good example of AI that could.
That's exactly.
I'd like to bring in. I'm sorry, the lights are very bright, so if you could just give us your name and company, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hi, Josh Jackson, Sagentia Innovation. You guys have been dancing around it. You're right, it's the talk of the town, at least for this conference, AI. Joe, I'm going to push back on you just a little bit.
Please.
You've got to start somewhere with the communication. So you've got data needs to be defined by somebody. If that definition isn't correct, then that'll get changed. But when is a hospital system, a large hospital system, Boston, Cleveland Clinic, wherever it might be, going to step up and then drive the conversation about AI, about data collection? Because they're the ones. So yeah, you've got Stryker and you've got their ecosystem, you've got Medtronic, et cetera, et cetera. You've got everybody's own ecosystem. They're only going to be incentivized by their own products. When are you going to have a hospital system step up and drive that conversation for the greater good for everybody?
Well, it's a good question. And again, this is where you have a misalignment of incentives across the entire ecosystem, because you've got so many hands in the game. I don't know if the hospital's the spot for that. They're certainly the end recipient of it. And again, I'm going to use the word hospital and not ASC. I think moving forward over the next 5 to 7 years, the toehold for new technology deployment is going to happen at the ASC level and work its way to the hospital. I do not believe that the hospital is going to be the opening for new technology for a number of reasons. For bundling, which is to me is like an antitrust situation. So you're going to be, and you've got these ASCs that are run by PE, which PE has the smartest brains coming out of MBA programs who are taught to force rank the top 5 expenditures and carve away at those. And so you can introduce new technologies into these ASCs that are incredibly efficient, and that's why they exist. And now you're going to be able to build models around that. And the private equity firms that own 20, 30, 40, 50 of these ASCs are going to set the pace for where digital will enter the healthcare system. I do not believe it's going to be a hospital.
Is it a medical society? Can they set parameters, or?
Well, this is a privately owned business on the PE side of things.
Yeah.
Sages is trying, right? I mean,
Yes.
Who's trying?
Yes.
Sages.
Sages. Yeah.
Yeah. But anytime you have Sages is a great organization, PCR is a great organization, but those organizations have alternative agendas as well.
Yep.
Right. So you got to be careful.
I just know that they brought an industry to kind of lay it out so that you actually had these, industry.
In Minnesota, I've noticed a lot of focus at Mayo Clinic. I mean, they're definitely really trying to experiment with it.
Well, they can afford to.
Well, yeah.
Okay, when 50% of the hospitals right now are operating at a deficit and will be for years to come, I think they're worrying about right now just survival and not getting caught up in the conversation on the digital data side, personally. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm going to come back to, I believe it's ASCs over the next 3 to 5 years that will be the revolution on the digital engagement.
It's the hospital system that owns the ASC sometimes, and it's just somebody large needs to drive the compensation. This is all I'm indicating.
Somebody who has leverage.
Yes.
Okay, not large. Leverage and large are mutually exclusive. And I do believe that private equity will drive innovation over the next few years in med tech and digital and data through ASCs, and ASCs that exist culturally outside the large hospital systems that are opening up their own, but the culture still will carry down. But the ASCs that are PE owned will have every interest in the world to use data algorithms and outcomes to their benefit. So that's where my position is on that.
And for people who aren't familiar with it, that PE could own 50 ASCs, and you have no idea they have any similarity. They keep their local branding. That's where I go, and the docs have ownership, and they do the front. They do the clinical. Everything in the back office is done by docs doing whatever.
And
that's where the opportunity comes along.
That's where you're going to get new devices come in, and new practices come in, and digital dashboards and data and outcomes, and they also have the highest use of technology, the highest use of robotics. If you're going to build data, you need a platform to build it off of. And you need a control group, and then you also need the actual driver on it. And that's where ASC is.
It's unclear whether that'll actually be driven toward clinical improvement or toward financial operations.
Boston Scientific's Mike Mahoney in his keynote last night, I thought that he
Hold on one second.
drive for the clinical benefit if it's not financially.
Agreed.
Chris.
I was just saying, like Mike Mahoney, Boston Scientific's Mike Mahoney, his keynote last night, I mean, it sounded like he thought there was a lot of opportunity for them to get interventional procedures into the ASCs. Like that seems to be...
Well, yeah, everybody wants to point to the Joan Rivers moment as a faulty. I think what you're doing is the stratification. So data is going to help you stratify patients who are at risk, or low risk, right? So that's number one. Number two is not every procedure has to happen. Hospitals are important. They're critically important. But for probably 50 to 60% of the surgeries that occur right now, they can happen out of an ASC or alternative center of care. So there was a question up here.
Yes, please. Please, your name and company, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for a wonderful event and a very good discussion right now.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Namita Lemaire from IDC. So I have some comments and a question. Comment is, from the perspective of this event, if there were some key takeaways for me, some interesting takeaways, I think intimacy at scale. I love that expression, and the complete focus on patient experience was one. Collaborate to innovate. Seeing competing companies collaborate, the direct example was today Philips and Boston Scientific, which is, I think, a change we're seeing in the industry. Invasive but not intrusive. care anywhere, and embedded intelligence, to your point of AI literally becoming a part of everything, data becoming a part of everything. There are two questions actually. One was when I compare pharma versus med device, I hear a lot more of interest in pharma on generative AI and the applications. I felt it was relatively low-key when it came to devices. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And also to your point on the new entity that you described, that you expressed would come out of pharma. If you could elaborate a little more on your thoughts on what that would encompass. I know you said consumer engagement, but I'd love to hear what is it going to be like? What will be the shape and size?
Sure.
Peter, do you want to take a shot at AI? Is that
Or either one.
Well, I'll start with the
Either one.
The relative to the AI potentially. Again, there are a lot of discussions. For me, what's exciting is the generative part of the AI, right? That's why people are more excited. I was saying before, you have data, information,
Yep.
insights, and then action. And I think machine learning and some AI, that's been great. We have a much better way to do, look at x-rays and things like that. That's good. But now if things can flip to actually be actions, I think that's where we're excited as civilians, right?
Yep, for sure.
More than just a better Google search. So you're doing things. And that's where the opportunity, I think, is for pharma and for devices. I think the issue for devices is there's so many different factors involved relative to each patient and how to provide this or that other than maybe how you cut. Where in pharma, it tends to be a bit more of a card flip in terms of is it going to work or not? And there's a lot of information out there. And if you have a really great way to pull it all together and predict those card flips, that's one of the reasons it comes across as more useful. There's just a lot of different steps along the process for both surgery and then, to be honest, kind of how products get sold in the competitive space, because it's not the only molecule in the world that does this. There are a couple of different ways to do it typically in surgery. So that's my take on that.
On the AI, here's the issue, and this is why I think the big strategics have been struggling on the digital surgery side, is they're not digital natives. And if you're not a digital native in the AI world, buying an AI company does not make you digitally competent. And we've watched large strategics try and stand on the first place podium by buying a company because they're a market leader. And that's okay if the race hasn't started yet. But if you're going to stand on that podium because you can drop $10, $15 billion for a technology, and that's not who you are, as soon as you have to run the race against that competitive number two person, you're likely going to get beat. And so if the large strategics are the drivers of AI, I think we're going to have a real struggle there. So I think AI is going to come out of pharma where they're and closer to the patient and outcomes. And that takes me to answering your second question. Pharma has, in device we make things. In pharma, they're accustomed to large data sets. In device, we extrude, we inject mold. We really aren't driven by science and comparative to pharma companies. And AI is a science. And so data scientists fit much cozier into data-driven outcomes, as Peter said, if I'm pursuing a molecule, a big or small molecule. And so it's much more culturally adept to happen there. And also on the pharma side, I see pharma companies eventually, potentially, or may not want to inherit the issue that device companies have. I see pharma eventually getting their toe into the water on the RPM side, which closes their circle on the device side, and that entity will become a Berkshire Hathaway company of one of the large pharmas, if you will.
But one thing that I think that pharma brings to it is that it's a generational thing. Any biology, whatever, they do, if they're under 35, they've done wet lab and dry lab. And really today's management across all the pharma companies are all wet lab people, right? So they did everything based on pipetting and all that. And now students coming out of their PhDs, the best are wet lab, dry lab, which means they can code or whatever. They know enough to speak almost digital native on the relevant issues, and they can pipette or push a button to do the pipette. So they understand both sides, and I think that's a culture. Really impressive, and almost easier to do in that space than it is in devices, because there it matters. Is there a clear advantage in every step of way to be both wet lab and dry lab? Whereas in device, if you're designing a heart valve, to be the best at that heart valve, maybe you don't need to bring the eye. I don't know. It's just not as obvious in your training, at least.
Yeah.
You're already seeing a lot of excitement in pharma with AI, like discovering new molecules, new proteins.
Well, sure. I mean, look what depending on your position. I mean, we got to a not to be political, a solution for a vaccine in record time, and that was done using AI.
But is MedTech positioned to kind of flip that script? I mean, we're putting sensors in devices now, so we're getting, and I know we're data, what is data? But we're going to get data from devices. ORs are going to have a lot more data coming from the surgical platforms that are being created, even Intuitive Surgical, which I think is killing it in robotic surgery. They're going to be generating more data. Going forward, devices is going to be so much more extremely data heavy. And I know, again, it's a question of what that data looks like, but is it going to be in a position where it could become more of a data industry, or as much of a data industry as pharma?
It's a flywheel. So you need the devices engaged into the system, ready to collect the data.
Exactly.
Right? And then all of a sudden,
Pharma's just given a pill and they're done. They don't get anything after that.
Well, they've got a customer for life, and they have direct engagement with the customer. That's the big difference right now, right?
There is a loyalty there. You're right. If someone's taking whatever's
there's
taken,
engagement there, right?
Again.
Get me my X.
Yep.
Right. So that's one, and then number two is that I think pharma gets in way earlier, and go with me on this journey for a quick second. So I have a son. He's older than this now, but he was just born. Let's take me back here. He was just born. And I go get a 23andMe test, a more sophisticated one, and I see what he's genetically predisposed for. And then I buy a subscription model from a pharma company that he puts a Band-Aid on himself every 30 days. And there's biometrics that get pulled off of that. And then there's a little homing device in the house that takes those biometrics and shoots them out. And genetics loads the gun lifestyle and culture fire it. And now I know what he's predisposed for. And now he starts getting near the control limits. So I catch it before it's a catastrophic disease. And now I manage him all the way through. This is a pharmaceutical model. This is not a medical device model. Medical device model generally enters the play after
something happens.
The foul has occurred.
Yep.
And so I think, and now I'm getting all that data off of him on his Band-Aid for $29.99 a month. And now I'm building these enormous data sets. And I'm still going to need the device player to come in to make that emergency call on that device in that cath lab or that OR. They cohabitate together. But this is where I think you have that convergence. So I see AI, I see data, and I see consumer engagement, who is selling that patch, who is obsessed with the customer journey that I talked about earlier, that is an independent of the pharma company. And it's your Amex or Visa, who is managing the health of that patient. And I'm getting a reduced insurance cost if I'm on that patch. And so I'm pulling all the aligned interests together. That's the journey I think we're going to see in the next 5 to 7 years.
That's a good point that, like, with most device companies, I mean, the interaction that people have with them usually isn't until after you're diagnosed with diabetes, after you
even Robert Cohen this morning, whatever day it was this morning, talking about how they can use information of a patient who's, what's your BMI, how old are you, what's your activity like, do you have diabetes, to decide what implant is necessary, and to maximize the benefit of that impact. But you're right, that's after
the foul's been occurred.
Yeah.
So pharma understands subclinical diagnostics better than device does. Just how we're wired, and they're not better or worse, but they tend to be set up for AI and becoming obsessed with that customer.
Yeah.
Where device is prescribed by the clinician or the insurance policy. That's where I think you have the breakaway.
I agree on that as a prediction, but they're not set up to do that right now.
Not right
I want
now.
to make sure we're clear that they're not necessarily going down that path. And again, because the patents only last for 10 years, I think they'll do it, but it's not obvious it'll happen. I get back to your point. Come on, these last 2 days, I feel good about, to be honest, for lack of a better word, the reset of the med device industry over the last little bit to say, this is what we're going to focus on. We're going to, be humble yet ambitious in terms of what we should do. And I think the finance behind that will come both from upstream at the ventures and downstream in the ASCs and the hospitals, because MedTech has so much to provide, both on the device side and then what optimization can be done through information which goes into better R&D, which the customer never sees except a better product, and the other things which are a bit more, we would talk about relative to digital and things like that. So again, I think the space is in a good space, because I think it's trial and error, for lack of a better word, and I mean we've kind of come around a little bit, and we got to keep on.
What's the convergence, Peter? You and I I've been 33 years around this industry. You're younger than me, maybe a little less, but it's that convergence of device, pharma, biotech, where in the past, and we still talk about it, well, there's the pharma path, well, there's a device path. I think the data side, and don't go to sleep yet on the pharmaceutical companies making actually more money off of monitoring a healthy young person and augmenting their health, not treating disease, right? So let's look at performance-driven drugs, or performance-driven Viagra, right? Originally became a performance drug, but originally was a treatment. And so if I'm managing you and I now can have you be healthier, faster, stronger, smarter, as a pharma company, I know, and now you can self-pay, and I don't even have to worry about prescription prices. There's an entire category there that could be more than worrying about the patent position on a drug.
Yeah.
Let's just shift gears a bit, and if anyone wants to contribute, feel free to please raise your hand. We had the MedTech Innovator All-Stars here, 22 companies presenting. I didn't get to see any of them because I was involved in other sessions. Wondered if either of you got to see that, any of the presentations, but also we had the venture panel. And let's talk just a little bit about the startup environment. There's been some concern that capital is drying up. I talked to others who say there's an abundance of capital out there, just less traditional capital. What sense did you get from this meeting and overall in terms of where we are going with financing of new medtech companies? Peter, were you sitting in any of the sessions at all? Or?
I mean, some of them. And again, my sense is that there is, there's money to be deployed. It's going to be coming out a bit slower because the VCs needs to raise from their LPs, and they want to be more cautious on that. I do believe that, there's some companies where it's still very up in the air whether it's going to get reimbursed and those types of things, which add a bit of complexity or respect to maybe do an IPO, and there's no natural strategic for it to go to. Whereas I think on something which is naturally going to go to a strategic or potentially do an IPO, then it's just a matter of what the price is and how you get there, because there will be something on the other side. It's just a matter of, how low is that next round valuation. So I think you can get there. It's just going to be a matter of pricing, whereas I still feel like reimbursement on some of these things is a wild card that could put off some people investing in it because they just don't know. Mike Mahoney said it yesterday. Well, our biggest issue is sometimes we buy companies. Yep. It's such a great thing. It's better for the patient, better for the world, but it's not reimbursed, and we just end up eating it because it never gets reimbursed.
The money's there. Peter's right. It's just it's being a lot more diligent in deployment. Mm-hmm. Part of the issue right now is if you're looking for a lead, it's really hard to get a lead right now. Therefore, if you know lead, you can't get any others to join in. So if I'm looking for a lead right now because they're keeping their dry powder, if they've got 10 investments over the term of a fund, right now they're keeping all that dry powder close to them for follow-up. Mm-hmm. So that's number one. I think worrying about valuations right now in a financing round is short-sighted. You just need to stay alive, right? It's the only thing that matters is what happens at the end of the existence of that organization. So that's one. And I think you're going to start to see models out there occurring like Orchestra Biomed, which is a really interesting model. So what they're doing is they're looking for the gaps in the large strategics' current portfolio, identifying those gaps, working closely with the strategics. The startups, what happens with a startup right now is, there's two major financings that need to occur. One is when you're going to drive for your clinical trial, and if you get through there, through the FDA, then you've got to stand up a commercial organization, right? Those are your two big slugs on your investment. Getting there is precarious these days. So what we've seen Obio do, and it's got basically a biotech model, is they now are finding technologies, working with the strategics, a build to buy or build to co-license with. And the big strategic's underwriting the clinical, and the big strategic then will have a rev share or licensing on the back end. It's not always an acquisition model. So I think what that does is allows these organizations not to go build and hope somebody buys them someday, but go out and say, this is what we will deliver, this is what we can build. Will you take on some of the load here, and we'll have a rev share on the other end? I think you're going to see that coming up a lot more, and it's worked in sister markets before Device.
Yeah, and two riffs on that is, one is the notion of built to buy and some of these structured deals, and some of which are actually executed but not even announced, right? So I've learned there's several of these which have been executed between startups and strategics, and don't even know about it until it plays out for lots of reasons. And the other is that some of these companies have gone through, they for different reasons they've had to go through layoffs, and in some cases one of the cleaner ways to do a layoff, besides just general administration, is to go into your R&D pipeline and say, hey, let's just call below this line because it's not going to make our impact for 3 to 4 years anyway. And so what you'll find is 2 years from now and certainly 3 years from now, those organizations be looking to fill that gap of what am I going to give my sales force this year, and they'll go back out to buy. So they're going to come around if you're going to lay off all your R&D people, then you're going to have to go buy something 2 years from now because you've kind of cut off your own internal spigot a little bit. So I think that'll be a bit of it. The question is, how do you, as an investor in a startup, put yourself in a situation where you feel comfortable that 2 years, 3 years from now, someone's going to say, hey, I need something for my line, let me go buy it.
And you can have those conversations before, and the market's going further and further here. Look, if you look at the top 20 med device companies, the top 10 go up to about 200 billion together. I'm sorry, the top 50, 200 billion, and the next 40 are 200 billion, right? So it's the Pareto. But they're supply chain companies, they're distribution companies, they're sort of manufacturing companies. They're not innovation companies any longer. And I will tell you, as top headhunting firm for 32 years, when you're going for innovative, and this is not a slight on anybody, when you're going for innovative, leading edge, bring to me something that's not been done before, you do not recruit out of Medtronic, J&J, Stryker, Baxter. You don't. All of that happens at a very small entrepreneurial level. So as they continue to become bigger and bigger, and they become bigger and bigger supply chain companies, and they start to gut their R&D groups, and look, they're a publicly traded company, they have to. You're going to start to see those continue to move to the emerging tech venture community. Now, one thing that Peter said I'm a big fan of, I would love to see them do what Google did, is off balance sheet a large slug of money and allow it to be off property independent innovation center, that you no longer have to worry about that. And then you can attract best-in-class talent, because I will also tell you that I've never had some of the brightest minds come to me and say, put me in a strategic. My supply chain people do. My VP of Ops, who want to manage 17 facilities around the world, do. But the innovation is going to continue to come from the emerging tech small companies, and the venture world is making a lot of money on that. And don't go to sleep on private equity type companies that are going to come in earlier than they ever have before, pre-revenue, come in and start taking advantage of that market as well.
Do those changes in how companies are funded to build to buy, does that disincent people to join startups if there's not an opportunity for, and maybe there is, but for a larger payout down the road? Does it?
Not everybody wants a larger payout, right? Romantic, and by the way, only about, Holly could probably tell you better than I can, maybe 1 in 17 startups actually sees the finish line successfully. And even then, the person who's in that 5 to 12 year range isn't making a massive amount of money on the options he or she got. But what they want to do, and they're not there for the money all the time, we always tell them the equities, don't count on the equity, count on the experience, the network that you're going to form, and what else you're going to become informed of where the market's going to. Not on what is a legacy product that you're changing from purple to blue next year. But if your world is manufacturing, you can't go to a startup. If your world is supply chain, you can't go to a startup. If your world is finance, you can't go to a startup. So there's places for everybody. But on the innovation side of medtech, it will always remain and will continue to index towards startups and emerging tech companies. And I break those out as two distinctly different companies.
And to be fair to medtech, it's the same in biopharma and the same for Google and tech company. Their best stuff is they're going buying other small companies because it's really hard to be big, and you can do a certain percentage, but it seems de minimis.
Just to check what you're saying about private equity, you think private equity would be willing to invest in like very young medical device companies, even though they're not going to get a device to the finish line in 10 years, if ever?
I think you're going to see organizations like GTCR, Carlyle, and others start entering into right before pre-rev and invest early in pipeline technologies, because you're starting to see some of these executives exit out and open up their own firms, and they know more about where the market's going. And I think they can get in and they can do these rev shares, so you're going to have a revenue stream. So if I come in and I'm a PE type firm, okay, which is different than venture, and I come in and I invest in that technology, and it's a licensing deal where it fits into a PE world where I get rev over the next 5-6 years as I build it, and on the end I have an exit. And now I have a profit interest there for the people who stood on and carried that. Because the problem with the startups is a large strategic comes in, they make the mistake of giving a retention package to the VP of R&D, the VP of Reg, certainly not the finance person, when all the people who innovated were the click below them. And they're gone, acquisition's done. And all you did was buy the IP for the technology. You didn't buy the perpetuity of driving that. And so all of the people who drove innovation now went off to another startup. So when you do these acquisitions, you've got to structure it so you retain those people who drive that innovation. And you have to incentivize them intellectually and potentially economically as well to stay. So if I take a PE model and I hold it for 5 years or 7 years and build a value, and I still have an exit on the back end, and I get that profit interest pop at the end as well, you kept me retained in that for a long time. So I think that model has got legs in the device world.
Going and grow it, and they have the licensing, and then they can sell that to a strategic.
Correct. Or they do the rev share. So you have the rev share back into the PE, which is part of their thesis, and then you have the exit on the property on the back end. But all this is, what do you do to keep the geniuses inside the entity that you just bought or sold? Okay. How do you retain that talent? Because when that goes out the door, and that's the biggest integration issue, that I know strategics, they're way smarter than I am, but they sleep on that way too often, on the intelligence going out the door.
And Chris, I think the notion of PE, I mean, I think there makes a lot of sense for PE be in the middle of medtech, right? Because if you think about it, the VC, the whole VC, reading any text on VC, the whole notion of VC is we need to have one deal that pays out the entire fund. It's all about the power theory. That you need that one thing. That doesn't happen an awful lot in medtech. When you think of PE, you often think of leverage buyouts and roll-ups and stuff like that.
But they're also like, hey, look, this is something we can take and we can grow it a lot.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So there's money to be spent in that middle where it's not just a roll-up or an LBO, and it's not just a total card flip. 1 out of 10 is going to be a winner, and the other 8 we write off. MedTech, actually, if you think about it, is more in that middle where it's likely to say, yeah, there probably is an opportunity for this. It may not get 10x payout, so you can't compete with some genomic thing, 9 of which are going to fail, and you can actually operate it in a much more effective way to make money on it than you can with LBOs anymore, because now LBOs, all the easy money was made back in the 90s and early 2000s, and so PE money's still flowing through all the pension funds. They want to get into alternate. They want to do something other than just put it in the stock market. And so I think the smart people will kind of come in and do some smart things.
And you go back to if you're around enough, long enough, it's a little like what Palmisano did with EV3. So you took 4 or 5 aggregate companies, 4 or 5 good companies, technology companies though, and you roll them all up. And you have a single point, call point, and you're just printing cash. And then Covidien went in 2012, or Medtronic, Covidien and Medtronic bought them in 2000, right? That model there is, what if I had an ICU focus, and I created an entity that, okay, Bob, Sally, Carl, and Fred all had a technology that was calling into the ICU, but they couldn't stand up maybe the clinical side, or they couldn't stand up the sales side. But what if I was a PE firm that created an incubator for the great thinkers and the executors, and I ran clinical trials on that specialty or that subspecialty, and I rolled them all up, and I had a cash flow coming out on there. And at the end, instead of me selling it off to another PE firm, I sold it off to a mid-cap or a strategic. And I de-risked everything already, and I retained my talent. That's all I think about is talent 24 hours a day, and it's probably last on the list when they go through the thesis, when they go through an acquisition. It's disrespected terribly, and I have these conversations with every person who was walked out the door during the acquisition. So that is what helps you retain the most important thing, the talent and the minds that create the new devices.
Great. Well, Chris and I have to sweep the floors and take out the trash. So
take down the banners. I'm
sure people have flights to catch and whatnot. But any last takeaways, Peter? I'll let you. I know you sat in on the J&J presentation about their surgical robot. If you want to hit upon that, or whatever you want to do.
So two things.
It's a pick 'em.
Three highlights for me. One was I did get a chance to see Martin Buehler speak, which is interesting. He's like an OG in like real robots, right? So he the yellow dogs. He did the big dog project. So he was at Boston Dynamics. When he was introduced, it was clear. Everybody knew who he was, and they were all robotic. It wasn't down here. It was all the robotics.
Sorry, healthcare robotics engineering forum. Yep.
And he talked about his mentor, who was one just before him, and it was like the OG of the OG. So like he's a real, I'm sure my highlight for him was like he really knows what he's doing relative to robotics. He did some sort of Medtronic 5-7 years ago. Then he's done it in agriculture and other areas. So he's good. He didn't give us any secrets about Ottawa today, but he did a good description of kind of analogizing, what you do in other spaces to make a robotic for mowing and other things into that space. I thought that was kind of instructive. The second thing, I really enjoyed the thing about developing a commercial strategy at launch. Now, how do you make those payoffs? Because you're likely to not have a lot of money left, because you're likely to raise after you get a little bit of revenue. So if you're very smart about what agencies you use to do which thing, and do you go direct, do you hire a rep? So I thought that was a good discussion. And the third kind of a surprise is it's kind of a niche thing, but there is now a standard legal terms for taking products from tech transfer offices. And basically about top 20 universities and law firms kind of put together kind of both sides to kind of agree that this is for life sciences, the typical language, which if you're not into it, you realize you could imagine like every single university and every single company had their own way of doing it, and you ended up arguing over the wrong things. And that was a highlight. So
interesting. That's a great one. I hadn't heard about that one. Joe.
Again, when I opened up, what I do is I love these venues because you have so many different service providers that the device startups as well as the large strategics realize they can help move your business forward. And the number of people that I had, the opportunity and privilege to chat with over the last 2 days, you've really done a great job of attracting those people who are standing up the medtech medical device ecosystem. And I think organizations like DeviceTalks are so critical to our ecosystem because it forces everybody to come together, and it forces you to listen in the audience. There's an example in heart failure yesterday, the different aspects of whether it's pricing, the patient, site of care. All of these people that are here are really standing this entire industry up, and it's not just the device manufacturer. And that becomes more and more obvious, whether it's here or LSI, or where you're forced to have a discussion of what's going on in the industry and how do other, like myself or Peter or yourself, see the industry. That non-homogenized view, I think, is critical, and people need to support platforms like this more than just 2 or 3 times a year.
Chris?
Fantastic. I think you were kind of just referring a bit to the Abbott LVAD panel, which I thought that was definitely a high point.
Moderated that one, yeah.
Yeah, for me here, because just the fact that you have a device that can extend somebody's life until they get a heart transplant, and they're just thousands of people who just never have access to it. And there was a top hospital president, people from Abbott, a patient who had benefited, but and there were ideas thrown about how to do it, but it definitely looks like something we need to work at more.
And I enjoyed the keynotes I had with Tom Pullen and Mike Mahoney. I thought they both brought a lot of energy. They both showed a little bit of themselves. I enjoyed Mike Mahoney's story about when he was interviewing for the job at Boston Scientific, and all evidence pointed to him not taking the job, and then he just looked in the mirror and said, I'm doing it. And
checked his gut.
Checked his gut and said, I'm doing it.
How are you going to feel on Monday morning if you don't take it?
How are you going to feel on Monday morning if you don't take it? Oops. And also, to your point, the energy of the folks at the conference who just were generous with their love for the industry, and I think we all plug into that. And I just wrapped up a discussion on sustainability where there was some honest give and take and pushback, and it was just 40 people in a room who didn't agree on things, but we had a civil conversation. And when's the last time that happened? I mean, it was a nice exchange of ideas.
I'm going to Israel next week, so that happens there all the time.
All right.
And one of the nice things that came out, that there were some people here who had recently been laid off from other companies. Who it's nice to get some amazing talent and kind of just get back into flow. So I think that was a really great opportunity.
Yeah, I hope it helped form some new connections, and I'm sure we'll have some additional conversations in future podcasts. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the podcast and at DeviceTalks Boston.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, everybody.
That's a wrap.
I don't know, have some fun. This could be a disaster or it could be brilliant. We'll find out what happens, right? Yeah. All right, here we go.